each of us is on a hero's journey, to use Campbell's expression, and part of that hero journey, the hero task, is to create your own myth. Develop your understanding of what God could mean to you and what would make sense in your vision of the world, and why you see that Jesus is the part of you that says love. Buddha is the part that says wake up. I think, what religion is supposed to be about is setting you up for these kind of visionary moments, because they give your life meaning. And the myths that we believe are designed to, like the lathe, to affect how we think.
In this episode of the Plutopia News Network podcast, John and Scoop are joined by Susie Sheeler for a wide-ranging conversation with author Toby Johnson. Toby's recent books explore how homosexuality can lead to a reevaluation of people's role in the universe.
We're back again, the Plutopia crew, and today we're joined by a friend of ours who I'll introduce in just a minute. Just want to mention, as always, that you can find us on Twitter at Plutopia, and we have a Facebook page for the Plutopia News Network. We also have a Patreon set up, which we haven't really been pushing, so if you love what we're doing and you'd like to make a contribution, you can sign up through Patreon, and one of these days we'll create custom content for our Patreon followers when we have a few. Today's guest, Toby Johnson. Toby is a Catholic monk turned activist, psychotherapist, and spiritual writer. He has a rich history, which we'll get into in the interview, and he's also the author of 3 autobiographical accounts of his spiritual development: The Myth of the Great Secret, A Search for Meaning in the Face of Emptiness, In Search of God in the Sexual Underworld, and The Myth of the Great Secret, An Appreciation of Joseph Campbell, who was Toby's mentor. In 2017, Toby updated his spiritual autobiography in the book Finding Your Own True Myth, What I Learned from Joseph Campbell, The Myth of the Great Secret 3. Toby has also written 4 novels and 3 other nonfiction books: Spirituality, The Role of Gay Identity in the Transformation of Human Consciousness; Gay Perspective, Things Our Homosexuality Tells Us About the Nature of God and the Universe; and Finding Your Own True Myth, What I Learned from Joseph Campbell. And leading the discussion today, our friend Susie Sheeler of QI Radio ATX, also known as Queer Invasion Radio, a radio show / podcast dedicated to inspiring and educating the local ATX, that's Austin, Texas, queer community. Susie is also on Rag Radio with Thorn Dreyer and a guest host on People United, and we hope to have Susie joining us more and more in the future.
I can't wait. I really appreciate this opportunity too,
Sure.
both of you, Scoop and John, and welcome, Toby.
Hi, very nice to be talking with
It's
you.
good to see you again. Thank you for coming to the show, and I'd like to start off just a little bit about you. Give us a little history about you and Kip, your partner, who have literally made history.
I guess we have. Where to start in the story? But Kip and I have been partners since 1984, so we celebrated our 34th anniversary this March. We kind of got to be characters in Austin because in 1988 we moved from San Antonio here to take over running Liberty Books, which was the lesbian and gay community, the political bookstore, which was over on Lamar and 11th. It was a wonderful experience. You know, the book business is not particularly lucrative, but especially in those days, it was very important. It's the way to disseminate ideas, and within the gay community, the bookstores, and there used to be quite a network of these, functioned as kind of community centers because they were the place where you would go to find local newspapers or bulletin boards. Our bulletin board used to be what Google is now if you wanted to go find a business. Part of our story is that because we had the bookstore, we were sort of noticeable characters in Austin, and as a couple. And in 1989, I guess, or 1990, we were invited to participate in a ZAP of the Marriage License Bureau. There were going to be 30 couples who were going to come on Valentine's Day and apply for marriage licenses, and the county clerk, Dana de Beauvoir, was going to have to say, no, I can't do that. And that was lined up with a legislator, I'm not getting her name right now, who was going to put in a bill about changing the law on the marriage license to remove gender. The thing in the legislature didn't happen, so the event was canceled. And then a few weeks later they called and said, we're going to do this again. Are you all still up for it? So we said yes. They said, we might have some press, so you should dress up. So we dressed up in black suits and went out. Well, it turned out there were only two couples now, us and a lesbian couple. And the CBS National News was there. So it got to be a big event. And Dana came out and gave a wonderful speech about why that it's a shame that gay people can't get married. Then about 2 years later, Austin approved giving domestic benefits to county employees. And in order to do that, there had to be a directory of registered partnerships. So because we had been in this other thing with the marriage, we got invited to be the first male couple to register as domestic partners in Austin. There was a referendum which abolished the partner benefits, but the registry still exists, and actually still exists. Wow. Now, and that was an occasion for Dana de Beauvoir to give a speech when she gave us the domestic partnership. And then a couple of years ago, we decided, sort of for business reasons or financial reasons and legal reasons, and because you can get married now, we decided to get married. So we were had gone to the county to vote, and went by Dana's office and stuck our head in and said, can we see Dana? And she's still county clerk. And of course she remembered us, and actually it was a cute thing. Her office is back in back, and she's not the county clerk out in front signing things anymore. She brought us out to the front, took us to the front of the line. Oh, wow. And did the marriage license and signed it herself. And so we had a very nice thing. And then Sarah Eckert, who's the county president of the county court, so she's a judge, and she performed the marriage. Wow. So it was a very nice thing.
That is
very,
very, very cool. Yeah, very Austin. Absolutely. So what brought you to Austin exactly? Are you from here? Were you?
I'm from San Antonio.
Okay.
John read the little bio that mentioned I had been a Catholic monk. I have to admit that's slightly stretching it. I joined a religious order that taught at my high school in San Antonio, the Brothers of Mary. They run St. Mary's University, and I went to the high school that was associated with St. Mary's. And had a wonderful experience over a 7-year period of being involved with Catholic religious life. Some of that was when I was in college. I ended up with another order called the Servites, but had several experiences of living out in the country in like a monastery, a seminary. and because we were young, fresh out of high school, you know, I joked that it was half a medieval monastery and half boys' camp, so they had to keep us entertained, and we went on long hikes. This was in Wisconsin, southern Wisconsin, along the bluffs of the Mississippi River. Just beautiful, beautiful experience. But I really learned a sort of a deep understanding of religion. In a curious way, I got to be the librarian, and there was a plan to redo the library at the novitiate so that one person would organize all the books, and they would all be organized the same way, because for years the librarian had rotated through once a week or something, and so all the books were just scattered all over everywhere. So I had this wonderful experience of cataloging a 5,000 volume library, and everybody else was out working in the snow, and I got to sit in the library and read these books.
So I have a couple of questions. First, were you ever involved in, there's a form of prayer, contemplative prayer, the thing that Father John Keating did. Were you involved centering prayer? Did you do that at that time?
Well, you know, one of the it is a shame in a way that we weren't really taught how to meditate. We were put through 2 half-hour sessions a day called meditation or mental prayer. Within the Society of Mary, they called it mental prayer. Later on, I learned transcendental meditation and have a mantra, and learned all of the Buddhist kind of Zen meditation. I wish that in the Catholic education I had been taught that. Keating and centering prayer comes along a little later, and it really was the introduction into Catholicism of Buddhist ideas on meditation.
And that question sort of precedes my other question, which is, I know that you had an experience of deep insight. Could you talk about that a little bit? It's the kind of thing that in Buddhism, or in Zen Buddhism, they would normally call it satori. Could you sort of describe that?
Sort of the occasion for our getting to talk today is that I've recently republished or rewritten my spiritual autobiography, and it starts off with this account of what I think of as my great mystical experience. There have been echoes of this throughout my life, but the big event was one day when I was in seminary and had a very rough day. There'd been a party the night before, and somebody had sat on a lavatory and pulled the lavatory off the wall on the second floor, which then released the water. So the water had poured down into the refectory, the dining hall in a monastery, and I had been cooking lunch that day. There's a whole story, but that I'm not going to go into. But so after lunch, to which no one came after all I fixed, everyone else had gone to another party, and the novice master named Father Peregrine had been cleaning the floor in the refectory and asked me to put the buffing machine away. And one of these big things with the big wheel, you know, and I had to take it across a stone patio, and it kept falling off, and the brush would fall off, and I crushed my hand at one point, and I was taking it in and putting it up in a closet, and the closet was a mess because these same people that I'd fixed lunch for had not cleaned up after the Mass that morning, which we had a big public Mass. So I was upset with them. And as I was putting it away, suddenly it was like I had this thought, oh, well, you know, this is everything that happens to us is the way that God acts in our lives to shape our souls. Like an artist with a lathe, or a woodworker with a lathe, and the lathe carves into the wood, and the wood might hurt, but it comes out beautiful. I had a sort of a vision of that, or understanding of that this is how God would act in my life. And then all of a sudden it was like, it's not God acting, it is God. And this, what I am seeing now, is what God looks like, the vision of God, the beatific vision. Well, it's very easy to talk about it, or it's not very easy to talk about. What does that mean? It was the whole world, the room opened up. I kind of went out into space or something.
Like viewing yourself from above?
Yes, kind of. A little voice inside said, "Oh, you're having a mystical experience."
Really?
And that sort of brought me down. It was like, But the interesting image that came from me for this, and I try to keep this in mind a lot. For a moment, I thought the whole world is like an ant hive. You know those things where you have the little kids' toys where they have the ants between glass, and you can see the ant farm things, and all of it's made out of sugar. And the ants themselves are made out of sugar. And we are those ants. And this is all sugar.
That's amazing. That is a very
now, it's a very lovely image. I think, what religion is supposed to be about is setting you up for these kind of visionary moments because they give your life meaning. And the myths that we believe are designed to, like the lathe, to affect how we think.
And when you say that they are designed, does that mean that we have written them ourselves, or are these myths? I mean, they're universal, and they never change. And so, I guess I'm wondering why do we react so violently towards one another when we have these universal myths that we all follow? Do we see each other on different sides? I mean, do I see myself on the dark side or the light side?
Well, some of the myths are about how there are these two sides.
Right.
Part of human consciousness. I think gay people actually fit into this a little different, but most people are heterosexual. The heterosexual worldview is the worldview. It's the experience of human beings in which men don't understand women and women don't understand men, and yet are drawn together. And there is this way in which the world divides into male and female.
So binary.
Good and evil. All of the dualism, I think, arises from our heterosexual, this is the way nature has evolved to do reproduction, and it affects our consciousness as much as it affects our bodies.
Right.
And we're divided.
Men don't understand women, but they think they do. And women don't understand men, but they think they do.
And they're both wrong. They're both very wrong.
Yeah.
So there's conflict. Conflict ends up happening.
Right.
And much of the struggle, I think, within the religions was to calm that conflict, teach us how to live together well. But then in order for us to live together well, we make them over there, and they are our enemies.
So we need to always have a dark side. We have to have a shadow in order to continue to be the good guy.
Darth Vader is out there. Yeah.
And so this is a question I've had for a while. Who do neo-Nazis sympathize with in Star Wars? Is it the stormtroopers? I mean, I just don't know, because when you watch something like that, you watch something so black and white, I think to myself, I'm the good guy in this, but the bad guys represent the neo-Nazis and the fascists I see right now. So when they watch a film like that, what do they think? What side do they take?
Well, I bet they don't. Nobody thinks that they are on the wrong side. There may be a few people, but almost everybody believes that how they see the world is right, and if everybody else saw the world their way, everybody wants to rule the world. Remember that song?
I love that song, Tears for Fears.
Tears for Fears. We were listening to that on TV last night, and it really is true. And everybody thinks that they are doing the right thing, which would make things work better for everybody.
Right.
And unfortunately, some people's ideas just aren't. Some of that is apparently because of hate.
Right.
Hate gets into here, and it's hard to understand. All of the religions, most of the religions anyway, teach love.
Right. But there's also that flip side.
There's another side that
Crusades,
to love, to love my people, I have to hate those people because those people are threatening.
Isn't hate just one of the masks we put on our suffering, though?
Fear.
Oh, yes, it's really it's for ourselves that we are sad and it hurts. So we blame somebody
It's very
else.
painful to hate somebody.
Yeah, and to hold a grudge for a long time too.
Well, in the field of religion, the whole hate thing has become very political now. Of course, it has been for a long time. I remember from the '60s when John F. Kennedy was going to be the Catholic president that put all the little Protestants, into concentration camps. Those kind of stories were everywhere, and we see it today. And how do you reconcile these religious people who really hate it? They hate the gays, they hate the people that aren't white, they hate the people that aren't rich, and then there's religious groups that are just the opposite. Now, how could you ever reconcile these people? They're all supposedly religious, spiritual people.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. One of the things that I think is happening today, we started off talking about, before we went on the air, about your program, Plutopia, that started off as futurist. And so then you introduced me talking about Joseph Campbell, and when you think about Joseph Campbell, you think about the distant past and these old myths. But I think actually what Campbell's really about is the future of religion and where all this is moving to. And one of the things that has happened, practically within our lifetimes, or a little before us now, is this merging of the world into one. We know what's going on in Europe. We have news. We know about the religions in India. During the 60s and 70s, I lived in San Francisco during those days and got exposed to all this stuff back there in California, the crazies in California, sort of looking into the future. And so part of the future has to be understanding religion from above these individual sects and individual priorities.
It makes me think of the noosphere. The concept of the noosphere.
Just to jump back to that library at the novitiate, one of my experiences as that librarian was that I got to look at the books that the other students were not to see for the faculty, and among those was this little book about Teilhard de Chardin. And I learned about Teilhard de Chardin in 1964, sort of before it was the rest of the world, and I've always seen this kind of spiritual evolution that's happening.
That's funny because in 1964, I was an Episcopalian, and the priest from my church and I were having a conversation, and he handed me a copy of The Phenomenon of Man and said, "You ought to read this."
Yes. Oh, that's kind of this beginning of the New Age. New Age has turned out to have a very naive and stupid association, and to call something New Age is to dismiss it.
Yes.
And at the same time, there was something that was starting, in a way, it was the beginnings of millennial fever. As we were looking toward the coming of the age of Aquarius. And now we're on the downside of millennial fever. But I think Donald Trump and all this unrest that's going on in the world now, this is still, from 500 years from now, they look back on this, and that 50 years on either side of the year 2000, it's all one little moment in history. And things got really upset because all of a sudden the world woke up. It's interesting that now one of the expressions among the youth, the young population, is being woke.
Yeah.
To be woke. Buddha means the one who awoke. That's what we're waking up to, is that in some way there is this spiritual consciousness thing that we are all part of, and we aren't really individual.
So like the collective.
There's some kind of collective mind.
Right.
It's not getting very well reported on MSNBC.
No, it's not. We're
Fox
getting a bad
News.
rap,
Yeah.
quite
Well,
frankly.
from Tayar, you get the idea that this is going to all be spiritual and a mystical kind of phenomenon. It's turning out to be the internet and Facebook. There is a global mind that is evolving.
And it's also split into the black and white again,
also
right?
split, yeah.
So the shadow, the dark web, that's our shadow of the good part of the internet.
So we're supposed to rise above that.
Okay.
Yeah, there's always a dark side, right? And the key to dealing with the dark side is understanding it first within yourself.
Within yourself, yes. Everything that we see out there is a reflection of what's inside us.
So, what does that mean about Donald Trump? I mean, if he's seeing what's inside of him, do psychopaths do they have a hero's journey? Do they have a journey of their own? Do they recognize? Are they self-aware enough to follow something, to follow a bliss? I mean, I can't even see that someone like Donald Trump has a bliss. I think he just goes along and bumps into things, and things happen for him.
Well, yes, it is baffling why this is happening right now, or what is actually happening. I think we have to hope that it is learning a lesson. Some kind of, this is a positive evolutionary development that either we see, oh, we better not do that again,
Right.
or we all have to acknowledge the shadow within us.
That's the part. I think but psychopaths generally seem to have a bigger shadow. Is that fair to say?
And may not know they have a shadow.
Okay, so they're just living in shadow and they don't know.
Well, one of the odd things, this idea of the shadow, let me explain just a minute. This comes out of Jungian psychology, where Joseph Campbell and the study of myth and the understanding of consciousness and all of that really kind of begins with Freud and then Jung. And Jung talks about it as a spiritual, religious phenomenon, and goes back and looks at all the old myths and sees how this shows up. But one of the ideas in Jungian psychology is that we all have this phenomenon of the shadow, where there are things about ourselves that we feel guilty about or uncomfortable. We don't want them to be true of us. And we therefore project them out onto other people. And when we see them in other people, we react compulsively. Emotions arise that we don't know where they are from. They're just there. And because your shadow is unconscious for you, so you are unconscious of your reactions. And one of the ways of coping with the shadow is to project it onto other people. This is what you see in politics, that, and it's particularly true apparently of Republicans, and everything Donald Trump says about Hillary or about Barack is true of him. He said Hillary is fixing the elections because he fixed the election. The right tends to do that without having the consciousness. Now, I'm sure the left has got a similar problem, but this is a greater problem for the right, of projecting out onto other people what they are doing.
Does the shadow self feel the same way about the light self, that it needs the light to exist, and it sees itself as? Is there ever a self-awareness of the shadow?
Well, I think by definition, no. I mean, it's the shadow.
Right.
It's you don't know that you are being compulsively driven by this set of emotions because you don't want to know that they are yours. So as you said, John, part of the secret or the trick of getting over this is to recognize that it's coming out of us as well. And maybe that's how we get through this, transcend. The only way to get through the duality is to transcend it, rise to a higher level in which you can see both sides. And then when you get to this next higher level, you see, oh, well, I've got to go up another level. Because you can always keep raising your perspective.
It's difficult to see both sides in this situation right now that we're in, I think. I mean, it seems to be very, very bad versus not that bad.
Well, it's really hard to adopt the other perspective. I mean, the people who, there are people who support Donald Trump and are completely behind Donald Trump, who obviously see the world very differently from like the way I see it, for instance. And I can't, I guess just because of the context that I'm in and have always been in, I can't, it's really hard for me to see that. It's hard for me to see how he is okay for them. And I'm not talking about, you know, the extremes, the white supremacists or whatever, but I'm just talking about ordinary people who are really smart people and who still think that, you know, he's the best thing for this country. It just baffles me completely, but I know that there is, within their heads, there's a validity to it that they can see, and because I know that they're also smart people, you know, it's like, this is a perspective that I just can't get, and I can't get myself into. Yeah. And I'm...
Which is maybe why you actually need to work on it. Yeah. If we're going to resolve this, we have to work on ourselves. We can't just blame them.
Well, part of the problem of the polarization that we see is our inability to consider that, you know, to consider what the other person is actually thinking and what their perspective is, and where there may be validity in their perspective, you know, and that's just as bad on the left as on the right.
Absolutely.
Certainly a lot of this cynicism about government started with the left. It was during the war that I guess I was part of the youth movement. I lived in San Francisco from 70 to 81, so right in that time, and going to the peace demonstrations, and we were arguing that the government was always wrong about everything, and the military lied, and we've got to free ourselves from government. The very things that Donald Trump comes along some years later and says we've got to clean the swamp and government is the swamp. Ronald Reagan said it. It's like the ideas of the left get reflected in the right, and then the left doesn't like what the right does with them, and the right didn't like what the left was doing. I mean, you know, America, love it or leave it.
Right.
We don't hear that anymore. It would be a different.
We do hear go home.
Now, the one I remember was I saw a bumper sticker that said, "America, fix it or fuck it."
That was popular in Berkeley. We were probably at a lot of the same demonstrations because I was living in Berkeley and Oakland from 70 through 2006. So, as a journalist and entertainment person, and seeing the change in the left perspective was interesting, especially being in Berkeley, which was, ground zero for a lot of the things that were happening with the anti-war, the feminist movement. Yes, and I was living and working with these people, and seeing how it's been turned over by the right now, and they hate the government. We hated the government then. They hate the government now, and I can actually see that changing again, just depending on what happens with this current situation.
Yes, and the next election may turn it all over.
Yeah, because all of a sudden, if the Democrats win the election, then of course they stole it, and who knows with Canada through the election for the Democrats. It'll be that kind of conspiracy thing.
Well, this is all about like concepts people get in their heads and beliefs that people get in their heads that are, they're not necessarily rooted in reality. You get into a belief system, or you get a bunch of concepts in your head, you get a bunch of ideas in your head, and those things may actually contradict reality, and they may contradict your reality, but they're in your head. And I think there's a part of what makes people a little crazy is the tension between the ideas that they're carrying in their head and the beliefs they're carrying in their head, and what's really there in front of them. And one of the things about Buddhism is you kind of get rid of that stuff.
Some of this is modern media, isn't it?
Exactly.
In the Middle Ages, when the only special effects you saw was the stained glass windows at the cathedral, and you went and spent the whole day marveling at all the beautiful colored lights, and you saw the old Bible stories, and they told each other the stories and all that, and those were the heroic stories. We now, with television, every hour, every night, there's a new hero's journey being told of how the hero gets the bad guy, or it's a comedy or something, but it's the same plot over and over and over again. And because the media allows us to create fake blood and apparently blow people up, we have just got so much violence. Marshall McLuhan was one of the important influences on my life. He's unfortunately sort of been lost, I think, in history. But McLuhan's big idea was that the media itself affects what is contained in the media. The medium is the message. The medium is the message.
And the massage.
And the massage. Yes, it changes you what you look at. And you clearly see that now with the handheld devices, where your whole world now focuses in on this thing you walk around with.
This is making me think about there was a Netflix series that the Wachowskis put together called Sense8.
It was so good.
Sense8?
One of the best shows
Sense8 was it was about people who actually did connect in kind of the way that we're talking about, and were able to get into each other's heads and, saw these other perspectives.
Yeah,
it was really powerful.
It was really, all of the stereotypical people, I guess, of every character that, I don't know why the words aren't coming to me, but every personality type was depicted, and so you get this overall feeling that it was one person, because they share this collective unconscious, and it's just brilliantly done, I thought, as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was supposed to be kind of like an evolutionary thing that we were evolving into this connectedness in some sets of people. So they would, rather than being a bunch of individuals, they would be sort of like networked with each other, and they could step into each other's reality.
They're creating a hive mind.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, and maybe that's really where we're moving.
Well, you talked about the medieval media, which was very limited. If you had a religious writing, it had to be hand copied by monks, which could take years. And of course, then the printing press comes along. Suddenly you can make better and more copies and get them out to people. And now we are in, the internet age where anyone can write anything and send it out to the world, whether it's true or not.
No fact checkers, like you said.
Yeah. Well, so let me talk about what I sent out into the world for a minute. My little book here.
I wanted to
because I wanted to come back to Joseph Campbell for a minute.
Do you have
This
a personal myth? Do you have a personal journey myth that is that what you're sharing?
Well, yes, that's
in
maybe,
your book?
yes,
Okay.
and that's what the book is about.
Here we go.
The title of the book is Finding Your Own True Myth. There's obviously a kind of oxymoron there of the true myth.
Right.
Because in religious studies, myths are understood not to be falsehoods, but symbolic conveyors of a deeper truth. So the story of God creating the world in 7 days, there's no history to that. That is a story to allow us to conceive of how creation happened. And unfortunately, somewhere because of the rise of science, religion and science end up kind of claiming the same kind of truth, so they conflict. But religion has a whole different kind of truth. So so your true myth is the myth that moves you and explains things to you and gives you a reason.
And is that one of the universal myths, or is that a myth that you create for yourself? I would think that if it's a myth, it would apply to everybody.
Well, I think each of us is on a hero's journey, to use Campbell's expression, and part of that hero journey, the hero task, is to create your own myth. Develop your understanding of what God could mean to you and what would make sense in your vision of the world, and why you see that Jesus is the part of you that says love. Buddha is the part that says wake up, know what's going on. The subtitle of my book, and here's where I want to go with it, What I Learned from Joseph Campbell. I was very fortunate as a young hippie in San Francisco. I was taking a class, I was in a school called the California Institute of Asian Studies, studying comparative religion. And there was an announcement on the bulletin board that Campbell was giving a speech, or a weekend workshop at a retreat camp up in Northern California. I had read The Hero with a Thousand Faces a couple of years before, and it had explained so much of religion to me, so I wanted to go hear him. And as a poor hippie flower child, I applied for a work scholarship and was invited then to come up a day early to help clean the building. And Joe, as we learned to know him, arrived early. So I got to meet him in this very casual way with a couple of other volunteers. Actually, without going off too far on that, it's a wonderful story about Joseph Campbell. And there's one of the movies about him is called Call Me Joe. Joe, when you would be introduced, he would say, "Call me Joe." Well, actually, the reason for this, I think, this is my projection, but I'm sure this is true. Part of his story was that he had gone, he was at Columbia University working on his dissertation, and had gone to Europe, and he was studying European languages. And he got over there and got exposed to Hinduism and Hindu mythology, and realized that mythology is more important than language, or this thing that he was in of studying German. So he went back to Columbia and said, I want to change my dissertation topic, and they said no. So he ended up dropping out and never got a doctorate. So people certainly, when they were introduced to Campbell, would say, "Oh, Dr. Campbell, how wonderful to say," and he would say, "Call me Joe," which was his way of saying, "I don't have a doctorate."
Nice.
A very smooth way to get through. Well, one of the stories that I learned from Joseph Campbell, and I'd like to tell this as part of this, I've taken it upon myself, this is one of my missions in life, is to tell this story, because it's such a wonderful story. There is a great shift in there's a reformation in Buddhism that happens around the time of Christ, 150 years before Jesus to 150 years after. There's a 300-year period as what is called the Mahayana, the big ferry boat. Buddhism is divided into the little ferry boat and the big ferry boat. The little ferry boat only carries monks, because you could only get to nirvana as a monk. The big ferry boat carries everybody.
Where do we go?
We're on the big ferry boat. We're on the big ferry boat.
Same stream.
We just get to be in the big boat.
And actually, when you get to the other side and look back, it turns out that you were in nirvana the whole time. There is no ferry boat, and there's nowhere to go with it because you're here now. But so in this process of shifting Buddhism from being a religion of austerity and meditation to being a popular religion that taught a morality, the morality that Buddhism teaches is compassion. Love others, be compassionate, feel other people's pain. This is very much a story like Jesus. They developed a myth called the story of Avalokiteshvara. In Buddhism, in the old monastic Buddhism, if you were working your way up and you were about to become a Buddha, enter nirvana in your next life, then in this life you were called a bodhisattva, one whose being is truth. So there's the story of this young man, and he's portrayed as a sort of a teenage boy or young man, usually sitting in meditation, but with one leg cocked, and he sits by a stream out in nature. Okay. A very familiar image. Yes. And his story is that he has been a monk through many, many lifetimes, and in this lifetime is about to enter nirvana, so he is a bodhisattva. His name is Avalokiteshvara. As he is entering his last meditation, he hears this groan go up all around him, and he comes out and says, "Here, I was about to achieve my goal of lifetime after lifetime. Why the groan?" And nature speaks up. So you can tell it's a myth because nature gets to speak in a single voice. Nature speaks up and says, "Oh, Avalokiteshvara, we are happy for you that you are about to achieve your goal of lifetime after lifetime. But life is hard, and your presence among us has been the thing that has kept us going, because you're so pretty, you're so sexy, you're so sweet, you're so kind, you're so lovable. Thinking of you has kept us going. And we are happy for you, but it is for ourselves that we grow." And he says, "Well, then I won't go. I'll stay behind throughout all the generations of lives. As if you love me, I'll be the lovable being that you can love." And he thinks, oh, even more, it would be better that one should suffer than that all should suffer. He vows not to enter nirvana until all other beings have entered nirvana. But then he goes the next step to say, well, why don't y'all go on, and I will stay behind and live everybody's next incarnation for them. So he has saved the world by taking on all of our incarnations. So all of us now are all Avalokiteshvara, right? Fulfilling his vow. The name Avalokiteshvara means the Lord who looks down in pity, because he felt pity and so takes upon himself the suffering of the world. It also means, if you put the syllables together a slightly different way, the Lord who is seen within. Because for all of us, each of us, when we look in to see who we really are, we should find Avalokiteshvara down there, because we are all incarnations of him fulfilling his vow. What a nice way to say we're all one. I find this particularly nice for gay people, because it's got that description of him as sweet and loving and kind and pretty and all that. and bare-chested. He's usually shown bare-chested, and he wears women's jewelry because he is an androgynous character. Since he has to be everybody, he's both male and female.
Right, alpha, omega.
Campbell says there are 3 wonders of the Bodhisattva. The first wonder is that he is both male and female simultaneously. The second wonder is that he sees there is no difference between time and eternity, no difference between the world and nirvana. That's why he's able to say, I'll stay behind because this is nirvana. And the third wonder is that the first 2 wonders are the same. He is androgynous. He sees that there is no difference, so no difference between male and female, or both male and female. Time and eternity, both time and eternity. And the third wonder is that those 2 are the same. It is through getting over this duality that sort of is in us because of heterosexuality and our division of sexes. We want to transcend that and see that we are all one. And you see that we are all one, you discover that this is heaven now. And that's what religion is supposed to be. All of these myths, the goal of all the myths is to discover that this is heaven. And that's what I got that day at the Sugar and the Ants.
That's so cool. What a beautiful story.
So that's my personal myth. I mean, in the sense that it's a lovely myth. It's not mine. He is the god of Mahayana Buddhism. Campbell jokes that one of all these little prayer wheels and all that, they all are putting out Om Mani Padme Hum. Om Mani Padme Hum. The jewel is in the lotus. The jewel in enlightenment is in this plant that grows out of the mud. This is eternity now. And so all these prayer wheels are all putting out prayers to Avalokiteshvara, and all these prayer flags that are blowing in the wind are all prayers to Avalokiteshvara. So to him, more than any other god on earth, go up all these prayers. Everybody's saying, this is heaven now, this is heaven now.
Is this related at all to Viktor Frankl?
Yeah.
Well, Viktor Frankl, I have a Viktor Frankl story. When I was a little kid, some people lived next door, and there was a woman named Virginia Blair who was sort of my surrogate mother, the way that you have a next door neighbor who is your surrogate mother. As a young college student at St. Mary's, Viktor Frankl was coming to speak, and I went to hear him, and he was going to tell about the stories in the concentration camp. For those who don't know, Viktor Frankl was in in the German concentration camps, and realized that even there you have got to find meaning. And his book is called Man's Search for Meaning, because making your experience meaningful allows you to accept it even when it's terrible. Well, so I went to hear this speech, and he got up on the stage, and he looked exactly like Virginia Blair. So it's like, Viktor Frankl is my surrogate mother. Well, of course, not, but I still to this day think of Viktor Frankl very affectionately. And that is,
Well, I was thinking about, like, in what you were saying, the need to sort of acknowledge that, yes, we're all in heaven, but we may also be in the concentration camp, and we may also be experiencing great suffering. And how do you reconcile those?
The last line of my book, from I watched this the other night, actually. Well, not exactly. These words appear on the screen at the conclusion of the 1956 Audrey Hepburn, Mel Ferrer, Henry Fonda movie of War and Peace. The most difficult thing, but an essential one, is to love life. To love it even while one suffers, because life is all, life is God, and to love life means to love God.
So no matter where you are in what situation.
And that's how we have to think about Donald Trump.
Yeah. Wow. Do you have any other comments you'd like to make about your book or about your story? Is there Is there a gray area between this black and white? Is that the transcending, is we find a gray area, or is it just black and white in these myths and these stories?
Well, of course, this was an expression back during the 60s and 70s, during that psychological sophistication period when we were all in therapy and all that, which was that you've got to get over black and white and see shades of gray.
Which is a great book.
Which is really the secret that there really is no dualism. We're all in this together.
So the duality is a myth, something that we have perceived and created for ourselves.
We project the duality into the world. I mean, in a way, I can only speak for myself, because all of this, you all, are all just fantasies that I'm having in my mind, aren't I? As I am in yours.
Like the Don Quixote imagined himself fighting the dragons. And I find, have you heard of the new book that Salman Rushdie just came out with? Quixote, which is essentially, he never uses the guy's name, but it's Trump tilting at literal windmills. And it's brilliant as well. And Don Quixote's a myth, yes?
Yes, it was a novel.
It was the first novel.
The first novel.
But I didn't know if it was an actual myth or if that came from somewhere else. Did Cervantes pull that from another myth?
Was it based on somebody? I don't know. I have to admit, I've never read Don Quixote. I had a copy. It's a daunting book to even ever get started.
It's like.
But Man of La Mancha was, the Broadway musical. That came out when I was in college, and it was sort of one of the themes for our generation in the late 60s, The Impossible Dream.
Well, I guess the question is not whether you've read Don Quixote, but whether you've tilted at windmills.
Oh, yes, we're all tilting it.
Yeah, if you were around in the 60s and 70s, you pretty much were required to tilt at windmills. It was unavoidable.
But what a wonderful life we have lived. This is a crucial time in human history, and it's what's happening. In a way, the planet is dying out from under us, and something is going. There's some big something that's going to have to change again.
Do you think there'll be a revolution?
Oh, I think there will be a die-off. I think there has to be. We need something like 2/3 of the population are going to have to die, for the planet to support us. And it would be nice, actually, if that could be accomplished through homosexuality. I think that's part of the gay role, is to offer a model that you can live a fulfilled, participating, contributing life without having children. And that this model that our whole life consists of reproducing, and we've got to reproduce as many as we can, that has to fade out and be replaced. So while you say that you said earlier that the myths have not changed, and in a way those stories haven't changed, but what they mean has changed. The God out there turns out to be the God in here. We're moving towards some kind of collective consciousness, which is going to change what human beings are. We may end up becoming machines. That's a little creepy, but
like consciousness transference and this sort of thing.
Yeah.
Or we could have a complete extinction event.
Well, that's not an unusual thing on this planet. There have been many extinction events already. We may just be one of many. There may be something else coming. You never know.
Because it may be that the whole purpose of us was to build these buildings so that when the next generation, or the next living beings that evolve out of the rats will have evolved all this consciousness because the buildings were the test.
It'll be a hybrid of cockroaches and Keith Richards.
God, he won't die.
But machines, it's going to be somewhere. This consciousness is going to end up in the machines, and digital. Or the Borg, or something like that,
Very Philip Dick.
Philip Dick, yes.
It would probably be more of a hybrid.
Yeah.
Because machines are not, I mean, there's a lot of like fantasy around AI that machines could actually be sort of like us, but they're really not. But you could, incorporate technology into the human.
Yes.
Yes, more than more than you can put human into the machine.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yes. How do we get Avalokiteshvara into the computer? When he took on the vows, did he realize that it was going to be terabytes and terabytes of data that he was going to have to bear?
Anybody foresaw this. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, this has been delightful, isn't it? Fun talking. Thank you.
Explore Toby's life and work at tobyjohnson.com. His books are available on amazon.com. With John Lemkowski and Susie Sheeler, I'm Scoop Sweeney. This is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.